Welcome to One-on-One, the Daily Items weekly digital program featuring Susquehanna Valley newsmakers interviewed by Daily Item reporters. Today's guest is the Bucknell head football coach, Dave Cecchini, interviewed by sports editor Kurt Ritzman.
Sunbury Motor Company.
Austin Martin, Kia Elite Sales Consultant, Maranatha Christian School.
Amber Wren, Certified Hyundai and Lincoln Sales Consultant, Selinsgrove Area High School.
Ian Chikuski, Certified Ford Sales Professional, Mount Carmel and Shamokin area.
Christopher Stenglein, Ford Certified Sales Consultant, Selinsgrove Area High School.
Tom MERTZ, fourth generation owner, Sunbury Motor Company, SHIKELLAMY High School.
A tradition of trust since 1915.
Welcome to One-on-One. I'm Daily Item sports editor Kurt Ritzman, and I'm joined today by Bucknell football coach Dave Cecchini. Thanks for joining me today, Coach.
Thanks. Good to be here.
I guess first is, how are you getting settled in Lewisburg? I know your family was planning to move out here once the school year ends. How's that process been going for you guys?
Yeah, it's been going great. We moved the family out at the beginning of June, so we've been here for a couple of months now. Kids really are enjoying it, and that was obviously a concern for me as a parent. Wanted to make sure anytime you're moving a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, that can be a rough transition, but they love Lewisburg, they love Bucknell, and probably most importantly, they've gotten a chance to tour their new schools, the high school, the middle school, and they're really excited about that.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that. One of the things that really stuck out to me during your introduction in February was your acronym ACT, that you said kind of emphasized or was a good representation of your coaching philosophy. Would you tell us a little bit about what that means and,
Sure.
and how you've come to adopt that as a coach?
Sure, yeah. So ACT, each letter represents a pillar of our program. The first, the A, stands for attitude, which, in a nutshell, is about life being 10% what happens to you and 90% of how you react to that. The second phase is character, so the C is for character, and that's always something, representing, it's about life being bigger than yourself and representing the football team and the university and Lewisburg and central Pennsylvania and so on and so forth, and so trying to develop men of character, and the T is for toughness. So you can't win a football championship. There's never been a championship football team out there that hasn't been a tough football team, able to handle adversity, rise above, win the fourth quarter, all those things. So together they spell out the word ACT, and that goes along with one of my favorite sayings is that championship teams act like championship teams before they are championship teams.
That's Bill Walsh, right?
Yes.
So I want to talk about your playing career a little bit in a minute, but
Okay.
I guess after such a good run as a wide receiver at Lehigh, did you know that you wanted to coach after college, or how did you get into coaching after?
I really didn't know that I wanted to be a coach. Now, my father was a coach for many years, was an assistant coach for the Minnesota Vikings when I was growing up. He got out of coaching when I was 10. He was there through the Bud Grant years, some pretty good years for the Vikings, and so my first exposure was watching the Vikings practice. I was a ball boy when I was 14 and 15 years old. I didn't play organized football until I went into my freshman year of high school. So that was kind of my early on exposure to the game. So I certainly developed a love and a passion for the game of football, but I didn't know I wanted to be a coach. Really, after my senior season at Lehigh, I was fortunate enough to play in a postseason all-star game down in Jackson, Mississippi. I did that and played well enough to impress some of the coaches, the scouts that were there, rather. So I wasn't big enough or fast enough to go to the NFL, but the CFL came calling, and so I signed with the Toronto Argonauts, and unfortunately I was one class short of graduating. So the CFL season starts much earlier than the NFL season, so I had to report for training camp way back in early June, and so I couldn't take that summer school course, and I didn't wind up making the Argonauts' final roster, and they released me in July, and I was fortunate enough to get a phone call from the head coach, Kevin Higgins at the time, had just become the new head coach at Lehigh, and he offered to pay for the one class that I needed for graduation if I would come and be an assistant coach, and that's really how I got into it, just circumstance more than anything else.
And so did you just take to it immediately once you started that?
Absolutely. It was just felt right to me, and so after that year as a student coach, the following year I was a graduate assistant, and that transitioned into a full-time position, which became a coordinator, and so on and so forth. So it's something that is really, as soon as I started and kind of figured out what this job was all about, I've never looked back.
So a lot of success as a coordinator, offensive coordinator, offensive assistant, setting points records, yards records. What was the transition like when you took over at Valparaiso for your first head coaching job?
Sure. Yeah, it was a tough situation. Valparaiso was at the time, I think without question, probably the worst Division I FCS program in the country. Wow. They had only won one game in each of the past 3 seasons, and that was all against the same team. So they were coming off of 3 straight 1-10 seasons, and before that they were 0-11. So really were struggling. The facilities needed improvement, but I saw that the university was important to the university. They were behind the football team, and I jumped at the opportunity, not because of what Valparaiso was. It was really more what I believed it could become. And myself and my staff worked really, really hard there to build and turn around that program and improve the facilities and improve things off the field, the character issues, grade point average of the team, and stuff like that. So it was certainly not an easy place to win games or win championships, but I've always been a very firm believer it's those types of teams and those types of struggles that are going to turn you into the best coach that you can be.
So with all that being said, when you took over, how gratifying was it then to have the first winning season at Valparaiso in 17 years, I think? It
was an incredible feeling. The alumni that came out and supported us, and it was a crazy season, and we did it. We beat, to go 6-5, we beat Dayton. I think they had beaten Valparaiso, I believe, 16 years in a row, and we beat them in just the terrible, just thunderstorm, raining, wind, you name it, cold temperatures, and it was a huge shootout that we won 8-7, if you can believe that, by going for 2 and the win, and not settling for the tie and going to overtime. So it was a really, really exciting conclusion to an amazing season, and it was very gratifying.
You have said that you like to go for it, go for 2, go for it on 4th down, so I'm sure people are going to be excited to see that this upcoming season at Bucknell. And so what attracted you about the Bucknell job?
Sure, just having coached in both the Patriot League at Lehigh, and I coached for 3 years as the offensive coordinator at Harvard. Just the Ivy League and Patriot League student athlete, someone who's really mature, is hopefully very passionate about football, but has other passions in their life as well. They're more of a well-rounded person, intelligent, able to handle a conversation. I love being around that type of football player. They're eager to be coached. They want to become the best that they can be. Usually, in most cases, they're mature enough to understand that they've got to handle things in the classroom, and that still has to take priority as much as they love football. The schoolwork has to come first, and that's really that day in and day out interaction that I get with the student athlete. Most days is really what attracted me to Bucknell.
That's very cool. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more with Coach Cecchini, talk a little bit about his playing career and his expectations for the upcoming Bucknell season.
Sunbury Motor Company.
Austin Martin, Kia Elite Sales Consultant, Maranatha Christian School.
Amber Wren, Certified Hyundai and Lincoln Sales Consultant, Selinsgrove Area High School.
Ian Chikuski, Certified Ford Sales Professional, Mount Carmel and Shamokin area.
Christopher Stengleit, Ford Certified Sales Consultant, Selinsgrove Area High School.
Tom MERTZ, 4th generation owner, Sunbury Motor Company, SHIKELLAMY High School.
A tradition of trust since 1915.
Welcome back to One on One. I'm Daily Item Sports Editor Kurt Ritzman, joined with Bucknell football coach Dave Cecchini. Coach, I want to touch a little bit on your playing career. You said you didn't play organized football until high school.
Right.
So how do you go from that did you just take to it naturally? Did you start as a wide receiver?
I always played wide receiver. I played some defensive back too. I was kind of dating myself, but we were pretty much one platoon, so you had to play on both offense and defense. Although I didn't play until ninth grade, the pedigree was there. My father would take me to practices with the Minnesota Vikings. I knew what zone coverages were. I knew very, gap responsibility and all of these things that probably someone who's 12, 13, 14, even if they're playing, in the Pee Wee football, they may not understand or have taught yet. So intellectually, I was much farther along than I was in the actual experience I had playing the game. So that kind of gave me a unique, perspective. One of the crazy things for me was as a ball boy, I was one of the few ball boys that would go out and try to catch the punters' punts because they were too difficult. The NFL punters would punt them high, they would punt them deep, and they were too hard to catch, and you would break fingers, and I would be the one that would go out there every single day and catch all of these punts. So when all of a sudden it came to trying out to be the punt returner in high school, and the high school punter was punting, I was like standing 40 yards back, and he's punting them 20 yards down the field, and I was like, well, gosh, this isn't the same as when it's, the punter for the Vikings, Greg Coleman, and I'm catching his punts. So in a lot of ways, it really did prepare me. So I really wasn't far behind, and had a good enough career where I attracted a number of Division I schools came calling when the recruitment season came.
So how was the decision to go to Lehigh then as a collegiate football player?
Yeah, well, back then, again, dating myself a little bit, there was no internet. So growing up in Minnesota, my knowledge of the East Coast schools were pretty much limited to the Ivy League, and that's really what I started exploring first. And I was actually very close to going to Cornell, but as luck would have it, the neighbor down the street, his brother was the defensive line coach at Lehigh, and so he passed along my tape, and he kind of called me and had to introduce me to what the Patriot League was and what Lehigh University was all about. And about 2 months rather after first hearing about Lehigh University, I committed to going there.
And then very good career, All-American. You still have the single-season touchdown receptions record for the Patriot League. I guess what were you able to do so well that season?
It was a combination of a couple of things. I had a really good quarterback who was able to give me the football, Scott Septenfelter, who went on and played some in the NFL. That helped. There were some talented wide receivers to get the ball to, but most of them got hurt. So after a while, Scott just tended to throw me the ball a lot. So especially back in that day where it was really uncommon to target a wide receiver, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times in a game, I was getting those types of looks, week in and week out because of that. So I certainly did my part, but it was kind of a perfect storm of just, I was there to take advantage of the opportunity, and I was given a lot of things had to happen right for me to be at where I was statistically by the end of the season.
Now I want to spin things to look ahead a little bit. Summer practice, fall practice gets underway later this week. I guess what are kind of your goals for that first month or so when it's just practice before you guys have any games?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we're out there, first of all, is we're taking care of business looking internally. Before we even look at our first opponent, at Temple, we're really just concerned with developing our team to fulfill its potential. We're not sure of that as a coaching staff. We don't know if that's where we're at. We're just trying to become the best football team that we can be. The wins and losses in the end will really take care of themselves. But in the month of August, it's about continuing what we did the first 15 practices back in spring. We're continuing to refine our offensive, defensive, and special team schemes, seeing which players rise to the forefront and earn that starting position. And then as we get closer to game week, then we'll finally start turning our attention to our opponents. But it's really kind of being introspective and seeing everything that we can control to maximizing the potential of the 2019 football team.
How did you feel the spring went, especially in regard to offensively? I know at your introduction in February you talked about pro style, lots of run pass options, and a more aggressive offense. How did that starting to install that in the spring?
Yeah, I was thrilled with that. I mean, we run a very complex scheme. You know, we're fortunate, again, we've got very smart football players here at Bucknell, and we're trying to take advantage of that, and they did a phenomenal job of just embracing you know, our coaching philosophy and our playbook. And on the offensive side of the ball, that was a pretty big radical change in terms of different tempos and a little bit faster pace and a slightly more sophisticated you know, passing attack, and our players have really responded. So we didn't put and install our entire offense in those first 15 practices, but we were able to get through it. Players were able to execute it, gain some comfortability with the scheme, which is great. And for the most part, we stayed very healthy, which was a big concern for us, because our numbers, you know, numerically, we're going to be have one of the smaller rosters overall in the Patriot League. So it's really important that our players stay resilient and stay injury free.
You said wins and losses were going to take care of themselves. Looking at your non-conference schedule before you even get to the Patriot League, it looks like it's going to be pretty tough this season. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. It's an incredibly difficult schedule. You know, starting off with Temple and then Sacred Heart, which was a really good team in the NEC, and then playing Villanova, which actually beat Temple the year prior, and then we played Princeton at home, which was 10-0, and I think they finished 7th in the country. So we've got, and then towards the end of the season, we played Towson, which was a playoff team last year as well. So it's an incredibly challenging non-conference schedule. But that's great. You know, in the end, I'm a firm believer that you know, to become the best football team that you can be, you can't just beat up on cupcakes. You can't just play teams that you can just chalk up in the win factor, you know, in the win column rather. So I really like the challenge. You know, again, the concern is that you can make it through those games. You know, playing a team that's as big and as fast as Temple, you want to make sure that you can make through that game injury free. And if you can do that, in the end, it's going to be a tremendous advantage for us to go through that adversity, to see the best opponent right off the bat and know that, hey, this is where we need to be. This is what we need to become here over the course of the following 10 football games. I think it's great to start out with a game like that.
What's kind of the key? I really want you to simplify. Bucknell's coming off a 1-10 season. When you took over Valpo, they were coming off 3 1-10 seasons. What's the key for this first year to get things start rolling in the right direction?
Sure. Well, it starts with your players. They have to buy in to your philosophy and to your system that you're installing in all 3 phases of the game. And it's about, again, that resiliency to sit there and say, you know, we're going to weather the storm. We understand what we went through last year as a 1-10 football team. That's unacceptable, but we as players have to change things. There's only so much coaches can do. It's just at some point you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, am I doing everything I can do to become the best football player I can become, to help this football team become the best football team that it can become? That's easy sometimes when you are starting off in the win column right away. It could be a lot more challenging if for some reason we find ourselves, you know, 0-3 or 1-4 and starting to get closer to league play. To maintain that type of, again, it goes back to attitude, that, hey, we're going to go out and attack every day in practice and work, just, again, concentrate on ourselves and become the best football team that we can be. And whether that means, you know, 4-7 is the best we can be, or 10-1 is the best we can be, that will take care of itself.
And then I guess the last thing is, it sounds like you don't have a wins number you want this year to feel like you're going in the right direction, but is there something tangible that you can look back on in December and say, okay, this was a good step, this was a good year 1?
Yeah, no, we're definitely looking for progress. Again, there's a number of different ways to actually measure progress, but to sit there and see, you know, to me, it will be a great mark to see, you know, just the psyche of our football team as the season progresses. I'm really looking for, are we becoming better week in and week out? Some teams start off really fast and then they fizzle out. Other teams can maintain that consistency all the way through, and we're really kind of hoping to be doing this as our players become more comfortable and more experienced, and again, we're hopeful that we're going to do everything we can to stay as healthy as we possibly can be. We're looking to get stronger with each passing week so that by the time we hit the end of the season and our season concludes in the Bronx against Fordham, we're playing our best football then. I think that's going to be the primary measure of success for me as a head coach, beyond all the wins and the losses and the statistics that go along to it. Are we feeling as a coaching staff that we are a much better football team in the end of November than we were at the beginning of September?
Okay, so a lot of things to look forward to this season.
Absolutely, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Coach, thanks for joining me. Thanks for watching One-on-One. Make sure to tune in next week.
Thanks for watching today's One-on-One. Be sure to tune in next week for another installment.